Welcome to today's installment. This is Todd Jeffrey Wilcox. He is a division manager for the Austin Code Compliance Department, and he is going to be the focus of today's segment that deals with honesty. I'm going to go over briefly about how the audit is being conducted, how we're finding the facts out here. We'll talk about open records requests. But part of Mr. Wilcox's job duties is training young investigators, as well as possibly, and I've seen him in the court, municipal court, testifying and supervising things. And so what we're going to challenge today is his honesty. When Mr. Wilcox was asked by an APD investigator investigating a complaint, did he truthfully and honestly answer the police department's question? So here we go. Let's take a look at Todd Wilcox and honesty. This is a typical audit cycle. I'm using this example as Austin Code Compliance. I decided to conduct an audit to see if they were treating their own properties or their business partners the same as they would other citizens. So in field work, I started to collect things like work orders from the building services department for places like fire stations and police substations and city buildings. There's over 2,600 City of Austin properties. So I started going through the list and turning them in. I've done over 200 to date. And then I started to analyze and evaluate and assess the impact of how the code employees have done their investigation. Are they following their own policies? Do they follow the material in their training? And then I exercise professional judgment. Okay, the word professional here, I'm not a professional auditor and I'm not a registered code enforcement officer, but I'm making an informed decision. And then here I'm reporting it back to you. So let's take a look at how Austin Code handled a case at Capital Metro property. This is a photograph captured from Google Earth of a Capital Metro office building taken on April the 29th of 2006. The blue arrow shows a rooftop air conditioning unit. You'll note that it looks like a double six domino. And so what I did is I was looking at Capital Metro properties, and then I went forward and backward in time. And here's the same building in 2009, in February the 27th of 2009, and that double six domino air conditioning unit is now a 10-fan unit. This unit has been changed out, so I went to the permits history for this address and did not see a permit for any mechanical air conditioning work going on here. So I turned it in. Now, this is not a City of Austin property, but is a business partner for the City of Austin. And in fact, we actually have 2 council members who sit on the board of directors. So I wanted to be sure that there was no influence either from city management side or that code inspectors weren't just looking the other way when it was property, when it was a business partner. So what I did is I typed it in. I used the address up here, Capital Metro office building, work without a permit. The first photo, and this is the comment part, I said dated 4/29/2006, and I explained about the HVAC condenser unit with the 12 fans, and then I talked about how the other one was changed. On April 15th, I turned this thing in, and you can see this is what 311 received. This is part of their record. They have it word for word. Here's this thing right here, gives the address, work without a permit. Then the word for word is the explanation about the rooftop things. How was I able to view these issues? Aerial photographs. I have attached photos right here in the body of the 311 work. The report was generated. I know they received it correctly, but the code inspector who created the case omitted all this information here. All he put in his log was this here. Let's take a look at his log. Okay, this is the case log. You notice the status says closed. The address is here. It's on a 9.23 acre lot. The property owner's Capital Metro. All of this is great. I turned it in on the 15th. It's assigned on the 16th. The complaint is for this building, Capital Metro office, work without a permit. The rest of my complaint is missing. All the information about the rooftop AC units is missing. It was assigned to Mr. Troy Collins. Here's where we start running into some major issues. If you turn something in, you're supposed to remain anonymous. Instead, the inspector, Troy Collins, puts my name right here in the middle of the form. This is a big no-no. You're never supposed to put the complainant's name in. So Mr. Collins clearly knows that I am the person that turned it in, but he's closed the complaint saying no violations found and has basically determined that it is an invalid complaint. Let's take a look at his photos. This is Mr. Collins' photos logs. Again, just like the case log obtained through open records. You can see that he's there the next day on the 17th at 9 o'clock. And he takes a couple of photos, and that's it. He's closed the case, essentially saying it's an invalid complaint. He knows who I am, but he didn't bother contacting me. He just went, the guy's crazy, whatever, and closed the complaint. Let's look and see what policy says about this. So this is the Code Compliance Standards, signed by Carl Smart. This is a document known, it's a training policy, special operations, document CCD 103. Okay, this is how you're supposed to conduct an investigation. They give all the definitions up front of things. We're going to scroll down through here. Standards, image, and conduct of investigators. Standards for site investigations, personal safety. It'll go through this. This is one of many policies that I have from Code Compliance. All right, so here's the valid complaint investigation process right here. Look at number B. When an investigator has concluded that a complaint is invalid, the investigator will contact the complainant if their contact information has been provided with the complaint. The investigator will inform the complainant that the complaint could not be verified and the case closed. So their policy is, if he knew who I was, and he did, and he couldn't validate it, why didn't he call me? So did he omit that information? What happened? Let's go ahead and double check our Code Compliance Enforcement Standards, Part 1. Again, right down here. When an investigator has concluded that a complaint is invalid, the investigator will contact the complainant if their contact information has been provided with the complaint. The investigator will inform the complainant that the complaint could not be verified and the case closed. So it's in his policy, it's in his training, but for some reason, Mr. Troy Collins did not contact me and question what it was I was turning in. So my next assumption is, did he do this on purpose? Why would he omit this information? I got the 311 complaint. So I went to the police department and said, hey, listen, I think there's something wrong here. I think this guy has omitted information, and I think he's protecting the business partner of the city of Austin. And filed a complaint with him. You can see it up here as tampering with the government record. And so I'm going to walk you through this very quickly. Tampering with the government record. My name is here as the complainant. The complaint was against Mr. Troy Collins, who is an inspector with the Code Compliance Department. His name is Troy Dwayne Collins Jr., and you can see he's got several aliases. By talking to a Mr. Marcus Gonzalez, who works over the 311 system, Mr. Gonzalez told the police that the person that was inputting that information, when I turned it in, it went to 311, it became a solid document. Evidently, somebody from 311 enters it into the document that becomes the case log for the code compliance. Mr. Marcus Gonzalez, I talked to him on the phone after this investigation was over, and he assured me that it was just a simple mistake, that when the person was reading it off of the 311 complaint, let's take a look at it. When somebody was reading this information off of the 311 file, they stopped at this line right here. They didn't scroll down to see this information here. Now, I don't know that if I quite believe that, because all this other information here about how were you able to view the files, aerial photographs, I've attached them, none of that made it into the report. So of the two parts of this investigation, the one about did he knowingly and willingly alter the case log, the police department tells me, oh, it was just an honest mistake. Now, the other part of this thing is the fact that policy was violated. This is the investigator's report that I got through Open Records. And you can see here it talks about how he was assigned the case and what's going on here. And he does accurately state that I felt that the City of Austin Code Enforcement employee identified as Troy Collins had intentionally omitted a portion of the complaint that I entered to the 311 system. Here's an important point right here. The detective explained to me that his job was to investigate whether there was a criminal act had occurred, and that if it was a policy or procedure issue, then code enforcement would have to look into that. Okay? So next day he contacts Todd Wilcox. Todd Wilcox, heck of a nice guy. He's a division manager over at Code. And the APD officer advised Wilcox of the allegation involving Mr. Collins, and Mr. Wilcox was already aware of the allegation. I'm very forward trying to ensure that there's transparency. And the APD detective explained to Wilcox that he was only looking at whether it was a criminal violation had occurred. The APD detective asked Wilcox if his office could look into whether or not actions that Collins took violated any of their internal policies, since they were more familiar with it than me, me being the detective. Wilcox said he would launch an investigation. Right, so this is where it starts to get interesting. Things go on. By this time, the APD detective had talked to the 311 operator. They had pretty much come to the conclusion that this may have very well been an honest mistake. I can live with that. APD posed the question to Todd Wilcox, the division manager at Code, if policy had been violated. Again, APD was only looking at the criminal things, but they wanted to know if policy was violated. This is pretty important because we have policies, we have training standards to keep our people from crossing that line. And so the investigator called Mr. Wilcox, couldn't get a hold of him, got a hold of an assistant director by the name of Paul. I call him Paul T. And he advised him that Wilcox was out and would be for a while, but he could reach him by phone. So Paul put Wilcox on the speaker, and Wilcox advised Paul that there were no policy violations by Collins in his investigation of my complaint. Mr. Wilcox advised the APD detective through Paul that there were no policy violations by Mr. Collins in his investigation of my complaint. Here's the policy. We reviewed it at the beginning of this video. It is a policy signed by the director, Carl Smart, that if an investigation is deemed invalid and the complainant provides information, the inspector is supposed to call. But why didn't he call? I think he didn't call because it was a Capital Metro property, and he had no desire to give me a call because he knew if he did call me, that I would say, wait a minute, you're missing part of this. This is what I turned in. Now, could it be that an assistant director of the Austin Code Department, Todd Wilcox, is unaware of the standards? Or did he just decide, brush it off, didn't do an investigation, and just told the cop what he felt the cop needed to hear. So let's look down here. And again, number 10, this is Mr. Wilcox's test that he took on the city's policy, dated November the 30th of 2010. Item number 10, when an investigator has concluded that a complaint is invalid, the investigator will contact the complainant. If their contact information has been provided with the complaint, the investigator will inform the complainant that the complaint could not be verified and the case closed. Obviously, Mr. Wilcox took this test. He knows the policy. Let's take a look and see what Troy Collins did. The same exam. You can see that he's changed his answers a couple of times. Number 10, yep, he wrote the word invalid. Mr. Wilcox knows, as well as Mr. Collins, that if something is invalid and the complainant has provided the information, you're supposed to give them a call. So during this review, we found a couple of issues. We can see that Mr. Wilcox was not truthful with the APD detective. Was he under oath? No, he wasn't under oath. He wasn't in the court of law. But do we really need to ask people if they're being honest when we're interacting with them? Or can they just lie to you whenever they want and go, oh, but wait a minute, I wasn't underneath oath, so I didn't have to tell you the truth. Todd's a nice guy, but the problem is we're putting people in positions and they're compromising their integrity in order to protect employees and keep the machine running. The machine is run by Carl Smart and Mark Ott. And now what's happening is the trickle-down effect. It's starting to impact the men and women that work for Austin Code. Mr. Wilcox has compromised his integrity. With this and the other videos that I showed, he is not a competent at doing the basic functions of an Austin Code compliance inspector. He doesn't know what properties he's working with. And now he's lying to APD detectives. In my book, he has lost all credibility when it comes to testifying in a court of law. Should he be fired? No. Let's give him another chance. But we need to go through the whole department and make it very clear to employees, you don't lie to supervisors, you don't lie to the public, or especially you do not lie to the police, and you have to follow your procedures. Here's Todd's theme song, sung by Billy Joel.